Welcome, everyone, to the Zorich podcast, Conversations with Legends and Leaders. I am Chris Zorich, and on today's show, we definitely have a true Notre Dame legend, All-American captain, NFL alum, and fellow cigar aficionado, Chuck Lanza. How about that for an introduction? See?
I like that. Very impressive.
We are going to get into a lot of stuff. It's really great because Chuck really has kind of seen kind of literally what has transpired from when Notre Dame had some really tough years, and kind of seeing it kind of the light at the end of the tunnel, which I'm really fascinated by because I've had a couple other players on and it kind of talked about like what was going on in the locker room and stuff like that. So I'm really I would like to dive into that, but really want to start kind of like, how was it growing up in Memphis? How'd you get involved in football and kind of go from there?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first, let me say happy to be here. Great to spend some time with you. No telling where this is going to go, but
very true.
I'm sure. So, as you know, I went to high school in Memphis. Actually moved there when I was about 13, Chris, from Pittsburgh. So I was a Pittsburgh native. Okay. And then moved to Memphis in middle school. Obviously went to high school there, played high school football there, got recruited out of Memphis. And it was a bit of a culture shock, obviously, coming from Pittsburgh, going to the Mid-South, I guess you could say. But we made a good transition, and I really enjoyed it. Got a lot of lifelong friends that are still there. My dad actually still lives in Memphis.
Oh, great.
I have two sisters that are in Knoxville, so they're all Tennesseans, and I wound up over here in Texas about 20 years ago. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Well, did you come from a sports family, or did your siblings play sports or anything?
Yeah, pretty big sports family from the perspective of my father. Okay. He was really the only one. My mother was a tennis player. Not really a high school athlete, but my dad was a four sport letterman in high school.
Wow.
And he actually played 2 years of basketball at St. Francis of Loretta in Pennsylvania.
Wow.
So he was quite the stud athletically. So I have to give him the credit for, what got passed along to me.
Nice. Well, so was it one of those situations where you felt a lot of pressure since Pops was kind of a 4-star or a 4-sport letterman, or was it just kind of one of those things where it was like, hey, do what you want to do?
No, none at all. I mean, I really fell into it, quite frankly. I wasn't much of a football player. Tried several sports, played a little soccer, played a little baseball. Was a pretty big swimmer.
Oh, wow, really?
I was, shockingly, right? Started swimming when I was probably 7 years old, and competitively when we were still living in Pittsburgh, and then continued that a little bit actually through my freshman year in high school. We had a group who swam competitively at Christian Brothers High School in Memphis. But the football really didn't start to click for me until I got probably to my freshman year in high school, to be quite honest. I was marginal player, in middle school, and started in 5th grade. So heck, that seems old compared to
yeah, right.
I mean, I think I started my two sons when they were in 2nd grade. So well, you know how it is down here in Texas. I mean, it's a little football crazy.
It's a little different in Texas.
Yeah, right, wrong, or indifferent. That's when they started. So, but they both enjoyed it, and one maybe a little bit more than the other, and then one actually went on and played in college. So they both played in high school, obviously. So, yeah, but I was a little bit of a late bloomer, but fortunately, physically developed in high school, and the drill, right? I mean, you eventually get to your senior year, and team had some decent success, and
sure.
I had some success, obviously, and got on some radar screens of some schools, fortunately. So,
well, I'm going to go back a little bit and kind of talk about this. I mean, I know I have a couple of friends whose kids are swimmers, and I'm assuming kind of nothing has changed. So, I mean, there were kind of, I guess it's called pool time or something like that. So that's kind of like 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. So I'm assuming you had some kind of early practices swimming wise. Did you stop swimming when you started to play football, or were you doing kind of both your first year?
No, I actually did both in my early years, but then
Okay,
when I got to high school, obviously different times of the year, right, than the,
sure.
the football season. So, and it was a little bit more lackadaisical. I went to a private all boys high school, and it was a kind of a case where we just piecemealed together the team,
Okay.
from a bunch of guys who had swam previously, and we actually did pretty well. But it was probably more fun than anything else. But we ended up being pretty darn competitive, and again, it was just a time where it sort of fit for the freshman year. And then beyond that, I got serious and throwing the shot put and playing football and the
Oh
swimming.
wow,
The
the
swimming
shot
went
too.
real well.
Okay, that's impressive.
Yeah,
Well, I
yeah,
mean, kind of talking about your dad. Were one of the sports that he lettered in, was it football?
it was. Yeah.
So did you feel kind? I mean, did he attend games? Was he one of those dads that was like on your ass all the time, or did he kind of let you do what you wanted to do?
Oh, we can swear on this, right?
Yes, sir. Shit, damn. Sure.
Not that I plan to, but anyway. No, he really wasn't. He really didn't push me a whole lot.
Okay.
He basically, just supported me. Obviously, both of my parents were very supportive. He wasn't one of those dads, right, that we've all seen out there, fortunately. And so, that trickled down to me, obviously, with how I handled my boys too. Uh, just didn't want to push them and into something in particular that they didn't want to do. Right,
Right.
you,
Right.
you got to have the want to first, right? We know that. But no, he was just supportive, and anything I wanted to try, he was there for me 100%. And my mother was as well.
Mm, So was it one of those things where, like, after games, I mean, did he say, hey, you could have done this, you could have done that, or was it just like you guys didn't talk about it and just kind of went home and hung out?
Yeah, I when I think back about it, I really don't remember having a lot of one-on-one conversations with either of them, quite honestly. I mean, it was
Hmm.
pretty superficial.
Hmm.
Basically it was more high level, depending on how the team did, right?
Sure.
And
Sure.
did we win? Did we lose? I got to start obviously as a freshman on a freshman team, and then sophomore year I didn't play a whole lot, but then I ended up starting on varsity thereafter.
Okay.
So it was one of those things where I ended up performing pretty well. So I don't want to say that nothing had to be said in terms of how I played, but they were just more supportive and interested in how the team did overall and that sort of thing.
Well, and that's encouraging because it sounds like your dad was like one of those fathers, one of those parents who had some success in high school and kind of understood, right? Versus like the ones who didn't play or didn't have any success and like, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that, or you did this bad, you did that bad. And it's encouraging to kind of hear that hopefully you had a chance to kind of learn that from your dad. And so when your kids were playing, you weren't like, on the film watching their click, watching film and going back and stuff like that.
Right. No doubt about it. I think from his experience, although it was, small high school in a suburb of Pittsburgh, but then he got a little taste of, a couple of years of college too.
Sure.
That was a really small school. So I think that was probably in the back of his mind at some degree, intentional or not. Quite frankly, we never really had the conversation with him to drill down on something like that,
Right.
Chris. But
Right.
maybe I can get psychological now. He's 85, but we
Wow.
can probably get psychological and go back and, open up his brain a little bit from those years and ask him, because everything was such a whirlwind after that, right?
Mm.
High school and then going into college and then going into the league for a while. So we really didn't we really get a lot of time to unpack stuff like that. But thank you for bringing it up, though.
Well, no, I just think it's cool because
Yeah.
when you think about kind of like how people got involved, and that's why like I always love asking the question, like, how'd you get involved? Some people, you know, their parents made them. I know I was talking to Ned, and Ned was just kind of going, Ned Bokar. I mean, he was going on and on about like how it was from Jersey and everybody played football in Jersey and just insane. And so everybody really has kind of a different experience. And that's what I think is really interesting. It's kind of like, where did you find the base, the foundation to kind of be successful over time? And when I was talking to Joe Montana, I asked him, he has the nickname Joe Cool, kind of, where did you get that from? And he was like, I think I got it from my dad, because like when we were playing, like we would play pickup games and everything, and he would put him in uncomfortable situations, right? And so, but he was talking about his dad was like on him, but it was really cool because you kind of saw this kind of this growth in him, and I think it's just so interesting, and I respect the hell out of your dad because he had been through it, right? I mean, he kind of knew kind of what to say and what not to say, and allow you to kind of perform without this pressure of, I have to go home and talk to my parents about the plays I missed, versus parents these days who are insane.
Yeah, no question about it. I think there's a lot of different reasons why, kids get involved, and you make a good point. There's either parent pressure or peer pressure, right? For me, it was, the big kid, what sport are we going to put this big kid in, right? I mean, a lot of it defaults to football. You can probably attest to that yourself.
Right.
So what are we going to do? He's not going to be a track star. He's not going to be a basketball player, it doesn't look like, even though, hey, as a kid, probably much like you, I tried them all, right? And it just so happens that, the swimming I was pretty decent at, so stuck with that for quite a while. And, my mother even got me involved in tennis for a little while when I was young.
Go. Nice.
Just multi-sport athlete, Chris.
I see, man. Swimming, I never knew. I'm learning so much. I would love to see Charlie White on the diving board or whatever swimmers were doing. Kind of talk a little bit about kind of like how the recruiting process kind of went for you, but also kind of, how did your parents kind of influence you at that point, or even if they did?
Yeah. So, high school in Memphis, right? So kind of in the heart of the SEC, but having come from Pittsburgh area, I did get recruited from, some schools up in the Northeast, probably most heavily from University of Pittsburgh. I went to a couple of their football camps as a kid.
Gotcha.
And, you may not even know this, but Coach Fazio, who was one of our coaches at Notre Dame for a while, and then of course had a illustrious coaching career in college football and in the NFL.
Right.
We went to high school with my parents.
I had no idea. Wow.
Yeah. How about that? So
wow.
I knew Foge ever since, from just being a very young kid growing up in Pittsburgh. And then of course, one day he's on the staff when I'm there at Notre Dame, but he recruited me at Pitt. He was Jackie Sherrill. Jackie Sherrill was the head coach at the time. Foge was recruiting me as a linebacker. I played linebacker in high school as well, linebacker and center. He was the only that was the only school that was recruiting me as a linebacker. So that's
well, but even there, did you feel any pressure since he was kind of a family friend, or was it just really kind of chill?
There was a little bit there. You felt I grew up there. I was a Pitt fan. Of course, I was a big Steeler fan, obviously. Had gone to a couple of their football camps. So, I took a visit there, and, we had some discussions, obviously, but, being in Memphis and the majority of the teams were recruiting me, UT, Ole Miss, LSU, Arkansas, et cetera, a lot of the, Southern schools, for predominantly. So that was a whirlwind for me. Who would have thought? I had really no clue on the recruiting side of things. And then of course, as you can relate to from your own experience, as you get into your, for me anyway, it was around my junior year, you start getting the letters from different teams and coaches start showing up to practice. And then you get into your senior year, you start to get a better feel for what kind of interest levels out there. And my parents, again, it was all new to them. It was new to me, of course. So we just sort of went with the flow. Nobody knew what to do, how to do it. there weren't a lot of D1 athletes coming out of my school to begin with.
Okay.
I think I was the only D1 football player my senior year that got a scholarship. So, took my visits, and you're probably aware, I think we talked about this when we were together recently, about Coach Holtz being at Arkansas at that time. He recruited me at Arkansas, took an official visit there because it was, pretty close to Memphis. And then, of course, I ended up at Notre Dame, and he subsequently went to Minnesota, and then we saw each other again when he showed up in South Bend. So that was a lot of fun. And I think I shared with you our first one-on-one meeting when we got there. I walked into his office and said, well, I guess I made the right decision. He looked at me and started laughing, and we had a good laugh about that. So the recruiting process over there was just super cool. A lot of fun. I mean, who doesn't like getting catered to and flown around and just having that experience, right? So it was a lot of fun.
So what made it kind of the choice? I mean, Arkansas, some SEC schools, Pitt. I mean, what was the experience at Notre Dame? I mean, I'm sure, and then let me guess, your recruiting visit at Notre Dame, it rained or snowed. It was the worst visit of all your 5 visits you ever had, I'm assuming, right? That's how it is for everybody.
Actually, it wasn't snowing on my visit, but it was cold. But, being a kid who grew up in Pittsburgh, that really didn't bother me all that much, right? And truth be told, I wasn't a Notre Dame fan. I knew very little about Notre Dame when I was in high school. Really weren't even on the radar screen. And then I have no idea how they found me, to be quite honest with you. Christian Brothers High School in Memphis is generally one of the primary schools that colleges are going to recruit and have recruited for decades and decades before I was there, and certainly since. But anyway, they ended up finding me, and we took the visit, and I drank the Kool-Aid like everybody else did. Especially with the tradition-rich football history and the university and the education. And, really it was up to me. A lot of people ask that question. Well, did your parents, how much did they influence you on that decision? They chimed in, gave me their input, but ultimately it was my decision. And it was, for me, Chris, it was a case where I couldn't afford not to go there. I really saw through at a young age. I mean, there was a little bit of maturity there, fortunately.
A little bit, right?
a little bit that allowed me to realize that, hey, Chuck, this is probably your best bet, because if you go to your second choice, which was LSU, which certainly had a much better football program at that point. I think they were going to the Orange Bowl that season when I went for my visit. They were a top program. I didn't think I would probably end up graduating and getting through. I was gonna be distracted, let's say, by a lot of other things that I shouldn't be distracted by.
Well, but here's the thing. I think that's interesting, because at 18, that's a very, very mature decision to make. When you have teams that are successful, the SEC was still the SEC, and you had great teams there back in the day. You had Arkansas with Holtz, and so for you to go to this Midwestern school and say, "Hey, their priorities are kind of in line with mine," but I know that if I go kind of to an LSU or to someplace else, I might not graduate. I mean, that's a very mature decision to make.
Well, the off the field activities were not all that unfamiliar to me, Chris. So I had an idea what college was like, right? I had 2 older sisters, so I had a pretty good idea. And I don't know, for whatever reason, I just think it was who knows? It might have been a God thing, right? I mean, that's how I ended up there, and I was supposed to be there. And looking back on it after all these years, and I've said this for decades, it was certainly the best decision that I could have ever made at that time, and I'm really thankful that I did.
That's awesome. So, did your parents come up a lot when you finally got to Notre Dame, or were they coming to games a lot? Or
Yeah, they didn't come up as much, in my first few years, although they
okay,
tried to make it up as many times as possible, and they came to quite a few games.
okay,
As you may not remember, but I lost my mom right prior to my junior year.
I
Okay,
remember that. Yeah.
and then my father ended up coming to every game, home and away, my senior year. So just a tremendous amount of support. He was all in. Hell, he had more fun than I had. Right? All these parents would get together at all these games, and
Right.
they had a great time. So
Uh,
he really thrived with that, and made some great friends with some of the other parents of the players, and they had a great time.
wow, that's amazing. So you're on campus. I'm assuming all boys school, Notre Dame. Not really a big difference, although Notre Dame obviously had women at that time. Um, was it kind of a culture shock for you being at campus, or I mean, how did that work for you?
Yeah, I think the transition was normal for any high school senior graduating and going
Sure.
to a university, right? I think we had the benefit of Notre Dame being a relatively small university comparatively to University of Tennessee, for example, which I took an unofficial visit to. I think at the time might have had 30, 40,000 students or something like that. And obviously these big schools today, the UTs and the Texas A&Ms of the world, with 50, 60,000 students. So the transition for me wasn't horrible in terms of being overwhelmed on the size and things like that, because small South Bend's a small town, right?
Sure.
And the school's a pretty small school in terms of total enrollment. So now that transition's one thing, but the other transition, right? Academically, athletically, was a major hurdle to get over. At least for me, anyway. You're not prepared for that. Uh, the rigors of the academics, and then the athletics, and then trying to do both. Uh, that was a lot to get acclimated to, for sure. I think anybody who doesn't say that went through it like you and I did is just not being truthful.
Sure. Sure. No, I believe that 100%. Do you remember what it was like, kind of, when parents dropped you off? I mean, were you like, "Hey, this is fine"? And I know you had practice and stuff like that, but like maybe a couple days after that, were you like, "Whoa, hey, I'm in school"? And what dorm were you in?
Yeah. So I was in Fisher
Okay.
on the South Quad. Spent my time between Fisher and Keenan, during my 5 years there, because I had the redshirt year.
Hmm.
I think coming to school as a freshman and you're part of a varsity sport makes that transition so much easier, right?
Right.
Because you've got your group. You're all coming in. You're all going through the same schedule. You're all experiencing the same thing together, and that becomes your family, right? So I think that makes that transition a lot easier. I had traveled quite a bit as a kid, so being away and
Okay.
jumping on airplanes and things like that wasn't really much of a hurdle for me to get over. But I think really the big part of it and making the transition so much easier is because you're going through things as a freshman with 20, 30 other incoming
Right.
freshmen in your class, right?
Right.
So everybody's experiencing everything for the first time together. You're rooming with another guy who's a freshman. So I think that made it a lot easier.
Yeah. No, I would absolutely agree. So you're there with kind of new faces, new folks. Were you ever kind of intimidated by, kind of like, hey, I know what type of football player I am, and oh my god, after the first practice, it's like, hey, we're in the big leagues now. Or did you ever feel that way?
Well, my host, my coming in was Wally Klein,
Wow.
and Wally was gone when you
Right.
showed up, obviously. But Wally was 6'8", probably 320. the largest human being I'd ever seen.
Ever.
And there I am showing up. I think I probably weighed about 235 at the time. And I'm supposed to be an offensive lineman. And, those thoughts go through your head. And then I'm touring the weight room and you're seeing a bunch of juniors and seniors and you're looking at these guys and they're all huge. And I'm just sitting there going, I'm never going to play here. Right. I mean, how am I going to get any, playing time when this is what the linemen look like? So, yeah, I mean, it is very, very intimidating, especially your freshman year. And, being an offensive lineman, you've got to mature mentally, you've got to mature physically, you've got to put the weight on, the strength on, much, much different than it is today, right?
Sure.
With everything that we've seen from a developmental standpoint and nutrition and everything else. Everything is just so much better now and faster than it was when you and I were going through it. There were some skill position guys, right, who came in their freshman year and maybe could contribute,
right,
because they just had those, God-given talents and physically they were there already. But it was pretty rare for linemen to really make any meaningful impact their freshman year. Oh, there were guys who did it, but they were few and far between.
You're listening to the Zorich podcast with our guest, Chuck Lanza. We're kind of talking about the experiences of kind of our first experiences at Notre Dame. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of the culture kind of in the locker room. And Ned, who was obviously younger than you were, talked about when his experience that he kind of, even as a freshman, he kind of knew that it wasn't like the best locker room he had been in. Do you remember kind of that what was going on at that time? Or because I guess one of the things that I have a really hard time with when they made the transition from Divine, because Divine was the coach before Faust, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, look, Moeller, I'm sure, is a great program, and the powers that be were Father Hesburgh and Gene Corrigan. They made this decision to hire Jerry Faust. And this is not a slam Jerry Faust by any means. But when you put someone who's just coached high school, a great high school program, but you put him in an environment like Notre Dame, I mean, could you tell when you were there, maybe your first couple years, that maybe something was going on in the locker room?
I could, sure, absolutely. When I showed up in '83, you're 3 full years into Jerry's regime at that point, and I think there was quite a bit of disappointment that the results weren't being delivered, and there were some unhappy players. That was certainly an ample amount of time for players, coaches, assistant coaches, media, fans, et cetera, pretty much everybody to come to a conclusion that, hey, this isn't really what we thought it was going to be, right? I mean, after 3 full years. And you have to remember, too, you mentioned Dan Devine. I mean, the last national championship was not that far removed, right, Chris? In 77, right? Mm-hmm. So, they brought him in not too far after that. So, everyone had a taste of, what we all saw in, the better years of the program, right? And so it was definitely on the downside for sure. We could see that, and then of course, I had to, pretty much, suffer through. I redshirted, but it ended up being 3 years. Coach Faust's last 3 years with the program, and of course by the 5th year, there was a lot of disappointed players. Their experience, why they came to the university, it just didn't pan out. The experience, and to this day, there's a lot of guys, unfortunately, that have a bad taste in their mouth because they were there. That was their experience their entire time. Me, fortunately, with the red shirt, I got to play for Coach Holtz's first 2 seasons. So that really turned around my my experience and my feelings about, the program and university and just that overall, experience as a student athlete there. So thank goodness that happened, or, I would probably be, singing a little bit of a different tune to you
Sure.
right now.
Right, exactly. Well, but also, what was it like, freshman, sophomore year, kind of having to go to practice every day and not getting these expectations that everyone wants. And I guess it's a little different because there's such kind of a high expectation at Notre Dame, right? And you're mentioning that, the national championship wasn't too far away. And so, my understanding is there were great players that were on this team and over the years, and you guys just couldn't get it together. But what was it like kind of going to practice every day?
Well, you mentioned the locker room earlier, and I don't think I completely answered your question. But, as a freshman coming in, or even as a sophomore, especially in my situation, you're pretty much just keep your mouth shut,
Right.
sit on your bench over there in front of your locker.
You'll be quiet.
But you're probably sharing with somebody else.
Right. I remember that. I remember.
You're a nobody, right? So, who am I to say anything? I'm just trying to survive, right? At that point as a freshman. So, but you could hear it. You're obviously listening to the upperclassmen, especially the seniors, and, a lot of bitching and moaning about certain things, and just a lot of unhappy guys, right? And you certainly saw it on the field too, because the performance wasn't there. And you're right. Going to practice again early on, you're just trying to survive. You're just trying to get through. You really don't have a voice, especially me, because I was never going to see the field at that point. But you could see a little bit of the dysfunction, I think, early on, at least even for me at that point, not knowing, enough about the game. Obviously, when you show up, you're going to learn a lot more when you're in college, obviously, but you could see the dysfunction, the lack of organization at times, and even some conflict between coaches, and there was some turnover on the staff as well. So we definitely weren't moving together in the same direction. It was pretty disjointed, for sure. And then, of course, we saw what happened, and then you got into the time where a transition obviously needed to take place.
So one of the turning points I want to talk about is the '85 Miami game. Okay, but before that, you mentioned that your mom had passed away your junior year.
Yeah.
How was that? Obviously it was rough. My mom passed away when I was in school too. But did you get any support from the guys in the team, from people in the dorm? What was that experience like?
I did. Coaching staff was there. They were supportive. Players were supportive as well. It happened over the summer in July. So I don't want to say it was an easy transition. Of course, it wasn't.
Right.
But it was easier because, we weren't in school and I wasn't having to deal with all that. You can certainly empathize with all the kids who have that horrific experience to go through. Fortunately, I didn't have to go through it. It was bad enough as it was.
Right.
But there was a lot of support there. Absolutely. Sure.
So the idea of kind of this support, everything else, and now you're talking about kind of sweating, kind of spending a lot of time with these guys. And before Holtz got there, can you talk a little bit? And I bring up the '85 Miami game because that was from my understanding, was an instrumental kind of part in kind of the evolution to kind of where we are now. Okay. And yes, it was one game, and there may have been other games, but can you kind of share with us a little bit about what was the feeling kind of going into that game, kind of game week? What was it like afterward? Because if I'm not mistaken, that was the game that he was let go after, or Faust was let go after that, right?
Well, he had actually let go or being fired.
I think there was something that happened before too, right?
It was before. It was before. It was announced.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it was announced that was going to be his last game.
Okay. Right.
So, you can imagine,
Exactly.
all the assistants are sitting there, obviously realizing they're all going to be let go. They've got to try to find a new job, right? And of course, we go down there and just get murdered 58-7. I was on mop up and came in and happened to be in on the drive where we scored. Okay,
Wow.
but nonetheless, it was that was the inflection point for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The temperament from the staff, from the players. I mean, everybody was just at a boiling point. The level of disgust, the disappointment, it had all, sort of, got to that level where, okay, here we are. And then this just sort of, culminates, the end of this regime, unfortunately. And then, of course, the trip back to South Bend after it just, poured more salt into the wound because of, the travel nightmare that we had trying to get back to South Bend from Miami, which is pretty well known. The travel snafus with the plane trying to land at the airport. And
I know about it, but explain to our audience about that.
yeah, so after the game, typically, right, we pack up and we go back the night of the game. So there happened to be a horrendous snowstorm in South Bend that night, and the airport was actually closed. But the the AD, the team, whoever, university, somebody was able to get a clearance for our charter flight to come back and try to land at the airport. So nothing like taking 90 or 100 lives, on a
Just
flight.
to get back to go to class the next day, right? I mean,
well, true. Well, actually, it would have been a Sunday,
right.
But nonetheless, so we actually flew back, and I think we tried to land the plane for sure twice, maybe 3 times. I can't remember, Chris. I mean, it was that bad, and literally had to reroute and go to Chicago and land at O'Hare. And we got on buses and bused back to South Bend. And I think we rolled into campus about 8 o'clock the next morning.
Oh my!
So it was having been just decimated in the game the night before, and then going through that, and then showing up on campus. You couldn't have written a script for a movie.
Right.
It was crazy.
Well, I also kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, like, was it a normal preparation game week for you guys? I mean, or did you guys know that, hey, you guys start doing the math, like, you know what? I don't know if this guy's going to be here, or like, when did they announce it? And also, like, I mean, how was practice that week? Were you guys enthused?
Yeah, I can't specifically remember that prep week.
Sure.
Obviously, it was a normal, preparation.
Okay.
I'm sure the staff was trying to, prepare us and motivate us. Go in. It was a TV game, obviously. So, we were trying to, get prepared to, perform the best of our ability, right? So I think everything was normal. It was in terms of, the 800-pound gorilla in the corner of the room, this was it, right? This was Coach Faust's last game, and we don't know where we go from here. So I'm sure for the seniors, that being their last game, there was a lot of guys that were crying in the locker room. To go out that way was just couldn't have been any worse.
Right.
Fortunately for me, I had 2 more years to come back following that. So, that made it a little bit more palatable for me and a lot of the other underclassmen that were going to have a chance to try to turn it around. But, but I'm pretty sure it was a pretty normal week, other than the obvious, right?
Right, exactly. You're going to get fired. And this is kind of, and I want to bring this up, and I'm sure you're kind of almost famous. You kind of enjoy the story, but it's also kind of like, I don't know. Kind of Holtz's first meeting with you guys, right? But before I get into that, my understanding was, like, literally the way it was arranged, like, they literally passed each other like in the hall or something like that? Like literally somebody got off the podium, like walking away. And I mean, can you kind of talk a little bit about that? Do you remember?
Absolutely. Of course I remember. It was completely bizarre. And I've told people there was probably never anything like it before, and there certainly hasn't been anything like it since, right? Because you know how coaching changes are now and how they've been for the last several decades, right?
Sure.
You know, somebody gets fired and then it could be weeks, if not a month, before they end up hiring a new coach, right? But the bizarre thing about that was, you know, Faust had already announced, or the university had already terminated him, whichever way you want to look at it, prior to the last game. So we knew that was going to be his last game and he was on his way out. So I think it was on that Monday morning, if I'm not mistaken, following the Miami game, Monday or Tuesday. I know it was shortly thereafter. We get together for a team meeting at the ACC, our facility there on campus. And Coach Faust basically, you know, gives his last talk to the team, an exit talk, if you will, about, you know, his experience, us moving forward, et cetera, everything that he said. He literally walks out of the theater and Lou Holtz walks in. We never left, right?
Jeez.
This is our introduction. Here's our new coach, right? And you know, to the story that you alluded to there. So I happen to be sitting on the front row, and there's a stage that, you know, Coach Holtz is up on in front of us. And so he introduces himself and, you know, starts his talk, right? So we're all there. Everybody's interested. We obviously knew who he was and the success that he had. And I guess probably 15, 16 years of prior head coaching experience. His record sort of spoke for itself, right? So, you know, the speech was, you know, pretty well, you know, moving along. And I put my foot up on the stage to basically just kind of, you know, push myself, you know, back up into the seat, sort of slouching down. And he immediately, you know, gave me, you know, points his finger at me, you know, hey, get your feet off that stage, you know, sit up on your chair and pay attention. And of course, it was directed at me, but everybody did.
Right.
Up on their feet, right? We're like, oh, wow, you know, this guy really means business, right? This is serious. So we're pushing past 30 minutes at this point, 45 minutes. You know, Lou's diagramming some plays on the
first day,
telling us what he was going to do, you know, how he was going to do it. And of course, you know, I had kind of, you know, slouched down back in my chair a little bit, Chris, and I made the mistake of putting my foot back up on the stage again to sort of push myself back up into my seat. And he just lit into me, you know, what's your name? How long you been playing football? If you're gonna play another year for me, you know, get your feet off that stage, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh my God.
And that story went across the AP wire at the time.
See, I didn't know that.
Went nationally.
Wow.
Well, fortunately, my name was not associated at the time,
right?
But as you know, in subsequent years after I graduated, you know, everybody started. You know, it's been in many books and it's been told on national TV, on, you know, games and whatnot. And of course, they mentioned my name. But it's fun now. And then of course I have to thank some of my teammates like Tim Brown, you know, whenever they're telling a story about it, it was Chuck Lanza. That's him.
Well, you know, it was great because, as you were saying, you kind of over the time you hear different stories, different versions. But Frank was talking about it. Frank Stans, he said he was sitting next to you. And, you know, it's just so interesting because what that did was literally he, maybe unbeknownst to him, but he literally kicked the feet off the stage of like one of the baddest guys on the team, right? And so what happens is the guys in the back, and I'm assuming it was like, you know, seniors, juniors, freshmen, or whatever, right?
Right.
And so, you know, everybody looks at that and like, oh shit, this guy who weighs 105 pounds, who I know nothing about, or if I do, like, what the hell's going on? He means business. And literally, from folks I've talked to, the stories I've read, that was kind of one of the turning points of the program, right? Because I think after that, like he mentioned, okay, guys, we have to get up at, we're going to start practicing at 5 a.m. morning conditioning or something like that. And then, like, literally, you guys like, what? And then the next couple of days, you guys like throwing up in garbage pails.
Well, yeah, and that's interesting that you mentioned that Frank was sitting next to me. I don't even remember that because I think I was probably mentally scarred for life.
For life.
So I completely forgot Frank was sitting next to me. But anyway, yeah, I mean, for playing with for Coach Holtz, obviously, he demands a lot of respect. No question about it. I mean, he's in a small package, but he gets your attention. He demands that respect, and rightfully so. And this wasn't his first barbecue, right, Chris? So he knew when he came in, he knew he had to set the ground rules, establish what the program was going to do going forward. He knew we were coming out of the ditch, right? And in order to get the car back out on the road, he knew what he was doing because he had done it for so many more times before he showed up in South Bend. So and that's what you have to do, right? Because at that point, you've got guys that that are on board. You got guys that maybe need to be kicked overboard,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're never, and that certainly happened. Not everybody's going to buy into the program, and fortunately, he had a pretty unique way of getting people to buy in. So it was a lot of fun, but we had to do things differently, right? So sometimes when you've got to make drastic transformations like that, you've got to ruffle some feathers along the way. That's for sure.
You are listening to the Zorich podcast with our guest Chuck Lanza, and we're kind of talking about that transition from kind of Coach Faust, kind of a losing program, to kind of making that transition to Coach Holtz. What was that like? I mean, and I know it's not like, hey, all of a sudden the next day, hey, we're winning. I mean, what was that like? Kind of meetings, coaches, like did you see kind of something kind of new happening and eventually you kind of bought in, or was it like kind of over time? Because somebody mentioned that he kind of made the joke and said, well, guys become better friends when they're all throwing up in the same garbage pail or something like that.
Yeah. So those early morning workouts, I think it was probably a combination of two things. And this kind of gets back to the state of the program, right, at the time. Because one of the big things that, Lou probably had some sort of commitment from university in terms of investments that were going to be made in facilities in particular.
Sure.
There's probably two reasons, and this is my opinion. I don't know for certain. I know one of them I can be, certain of, which was the early morning workouts, get the players' attentions, right? Show them that we mean business. I mean, it's a whole new regime coming in, right? So you're going to be walking over there when it's dark outside at dark 30, and we're going to be going through these crazy workouts. And there were garbage cans set out there because a lot of the guys were seeing their dinner from the night before, right? But my opinion is that the other reason that those workouts were held so early in the morning, Chris, is because we just didn't have the facilities, right? I mean, of course, the football program is a football program, but you had many other varsity sports, and Notre Dame at the time just didn't have the indoor facilities to accommodate all of that. So it was probably a situation where Coach Holtz said, hey, I want to, work my guys out in this off-season training program, and here's what I want to do. And somebody came down and said, well, basketball's in here, and hockey and track and baseball and whoever else. If you want it, you can have it at 5 a.m. Right. And he probably said, okay. And then that's when we're doing it. So I don't know. That's my opinion.
No, but I think you're 100% right on that, because for such a long period of time, mean, and maybe it was the Faust years or whatever it was, but I mean, Notre Dame football was not a high priority at Notre Dame.
Right. Right.
You
Well,
know, and if they're telling, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say we certainly didn't have the facilities, right? And I think that's one thing Coach Holtz immediately identified, and
Right.
he probably made it very, very clear before he took the job that there was going to have to be an improvement in facilities. And it wasn't, long after that we got the Loftus Center
Right.
at that point,
Right.
to get the indoor practice field and the new weight room, et cetera, et cetera. So undoubtedly things had to improve because, not only did you need a better facility to train the athletes, but it's a huge recruiting tool, as you know.
Sure.
And back then, that was sort of the beginning of the arms race in D1 football,
Right.
which was, what's your facility like, and what kind of investment is your school making in the program? And that meant a lot to kids coming out of high school, and it still does today.
Sure. So I'm gonna go back a little bit and kind of take it on memory lane. When you were kind of your first couple years, was there a time when you were like, hey, I'm not playing, Wednesday could be my game? Did you kind of give shit to the fifth-year senior that you may have had a chance to block a couple times? There's a story kind of going here, but I want to first get your background to see if you ever did something like that.
Not really that I can recall. Again, for me, my first 2 years, it was basically just survival mode and trying to make that transition and trying to get my body in a place where, I felt like I could compete with, the other linemen that we had, obviously, and then, try to compete against the defenses that we were going to be seeing on Saturdays, right?
Sure.
So, it wasn't really until my third year. I had redshirted, so it was my third year as a red shirt, and I basically played in every game.
Okay.
Ron Plants was a starter at center at that point,
Right.
but I got a lot of playing time and earned a monogram, every year that I was there.
Nice.
But really got some meaningful, playing time that third year, and then of course, had the good fortune of being able to, to start for Coach Holtz my last 2 seasons, his first 2. So.
Sure.
But there was definitely a lot of arguments, a lot of trash talk, things like that. I wasn't that kind of guy. I didn't do a lot of trash talking, especially when I was younger. Maybe seeing some scout team action and going against the older guys on defense.
Sure.
Right? I was probably too intimidated, Chris, at that point where. I'm just trying to give them a good look and go about my business. That just wasn't part of my personality at that point.
Well, I remember coming in there and thinking that, because your offensive line this was in '87, so it was you, Byron Sproul, Tom Freeman, Tom Rader, right? He was the other tackle, right?
Yeah.
And then was it Grooney?
And
or
Jeff,
was it
Jeff Pearson was the other.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this offense, you guys look literally like you were all fifth-year seniors. You were all like first-year pro guys because you guys were huge.
We had a mature offensive line for sure. I think Jeff was the only underclassman actually,
right.
Out of the group, and then Andy Heck at tight end, who
That's
I think
right. Yes.
I think that was his junior year.
Right. Yeah.
And then he moved over to tackle his senior year, right, in '88. But yeah, we had a mature offensive line. Both Byron and I were 5th-year guys. I think Tom Rader may have even been a 5th-year guy.
I think he was,
and Freeman may have been as well. So we had the good fortune of being pretty mature. We had a couple of years under our belt now with Coach Holtz and his leadership and his program. So. We had a pretty damn good offensive line that senior year, and you probably don't remember this, but we actually got the CBS named the entire offensive line the MVP of the USC game that year
because we rushed
for 300 some odd yards, which, doesn't seem like a whole lot today, but
Right.
back then that was a big, big deal.
Nice.
And I don't think that's ever been done before, and I certainly hasn't been done since, but they actually named the offensive line the MVP of the game. So that's pretty
That's
cool.
great.
Pretty cool.
And one of the things I also think is kind of interesting and kind of talks about the leadership on the offensive line. I'm not sure if, and not that I've looked at every captain over time, but I mean, you and Byron were offensive linemen, and you guys were the captains that year.
Right.
I mean, and to my understanding, right. Well, and then also, like, I'm assuming Holtz did the same thing. I mean, it was a team vote, so it's not like he hand-plucked people. But I mean, the fact that the team felt, because normally it's a guy in offense, guy in defense,
right,
and so they felt that, hey, you know what, this is some great leadership, and it just so happened to be two guys in the O-line. I think that's great.
Yeah, we thought it was great, right? whether the other guys on the team thought it was great,
right, exactly.
It seemed to work out pretty well. So I didn't have too many complaints anyway.
This is a story that you may not know, but needless to say, over that year, actually, my freshman year, we had a bunch of battles, Chuck and I. And I found the story out later, and it's basically when we went down to play Texas A&M, we wound up losing. And as literally a person on the scout team, I didn't get down there until later. And there were maybe a couple practices that we had before the game. And we wound up losing. And I was in the locker room crying because, and so the story goes, Holtz kind of saw me crying, like, man, I need to get that guy in the field. Well, the reason why I was crying was I felt like I let you guys down, right? Because my job was to service you guys, right? So, and I never thought I was ever going to play at Notre Dame, but I was like, hey, if this is my role, I'm cool. I'll accept that. And I practiced. I mean, we had practice. Obviously, it was a bowl game practice all week. And then, not that me playing nose guard over you was going to make the difference in the game. I didn't think like that. I just thought that I didn't give enough.
Sure.
And it was so hard for me to kind of really kind of keep that emotion in, because I felt like I left you guys down. And it wasn't like, it felt like I left Tim Brown down. I felt like I left Tom Brady. I mean, all these guys who were on the team, I felt like I personally let the team down. Now, that's a really almost selfish way to look at it, but that's kind of how I felt. And so it was so hard for me kind of after that to kind of think that I could be like a productive part of this team, because at such kind of a integral time for me, I was depressed, man. I felt terrible. Like, literally, I felt like I let the team down. And so it's interesting that you and I have had all these battles back and forth in practice. And when folks hear about that story, it's like, oh, well, he just really wanted to play. It's like, well, no, I really didn't want to play. It's just that I felt like I left the team down.
Well, thanks for jogging my memory about that, because I'd forgotten about that. But yeah, you definitely, I recall, were so passionate, Chris. And that's why I think one of the things that made you a great player, right, was because you cared. Okay. You really cared, and it really showed. And even though, and you have to remember, you were a freshman, right? So, the likelihood of you really seeing any meaningful time with, the competition that we had at that point, right, was probably minimal. But you took a personal responsibility of, hey, I'm going to do the best job that I can, for these guys, and give them the best look I can on this scout team. And unfortunately, I'm the one, that had to see you every day in practice. And your audience here, the fifth year center going against the freshman nose tackle, who, would end up having, being one of the best that ever come out of the university. But as a young freshman, you definitely were, trying to impress a lot of people. But I really don't think it was that, Chris. I really just think it was your passion and, your want to, to give us the seniors, the best look that you could so that we would be prepared for every Saturday, right? I really think that's what it was. But, that really positioned you well to go on to become the tremendous player that you ended up being. So,
All right, Chuck, you can't see it. I have chills because literally you nailed it. And people thought that, that year for me, people were like, hey, you're just a badass, or you're trying to do this. Like, no, I'm not. Believe me, I change positions. Like, I don't think I'm ever going to play here.
right.
But
right.
I felt like
Right.
my role was to help you guys. And so, like, Chuck, like, when you said that, like, no one, like, I've never had this kind of, like, even with, like, Tim Ryan, who's my best friends in school, like, we've never talked about this. And you hit it absolutely on the head. It wasn't that I was out there trying to have an attitude or trying to do what, I mean, I was a short nose guard. Like, people that you played against were probably 3 times my size, right? So I tried to give you the best look I possibly could because I wanted us to win. And there was nothing there was no attitude. There was no like, hey, I'm this guy. Whatever. It was nothing like that. Like, literally, I wanted to give you 100% because that's all I had. And I felt like that's what I can do to be part of this team.
And you remember some of those conversations we had, especially when, around Wednesday would roll around and I would have to tell you that, hey, Chris, I realize this is your game.
This is your Saturday.
I'm the one that has to play on Saturday, and I'd like to have a little something left when Saturday rolls around, right?
Oh my God, that was that. But you have no, and I'm so glad that you said, like, literally, I still have chills. But I mean, for you to understand it, and that means so much to me because although we've never talked about this, I mean, I was never trying to like one up you or trying to think that hey, I'm this guy or whatever. It was nothing like that. It was always literally, I want to give him the best look I could.
I'm just glad that I had to go up against you when you were a freshman and not like your junior or senior year. It probably would have been a different outcome.
No, but see, I say that to say, look at all the shit you taught me, though. I mean, I had a chance to go up against an All-American center. I mean, who has that chance? And so, literally, the following year, when I did have a chance to play, I mean, in the back of my mind, I was always like, shit, I went against Chuck. I could get this guy. I mean, like literally, I mean, that's how I would feel because those at least Monday, Tuesdays were, I mean, those are hard practices. And I mean, that taught me so much. And so literally it was, hey, I had a chance to go up against an All-American center. The guy you're putting in front of me, shit, I used to practice against a guy that was a world beater, and now who are you? So literally, it was both ways, man. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, good point. That's a good point. That's one of the benefits that we had, being at Notre Dame, right? Because everybody showing up was, high school All-Americans and among the best in the country, and we got to practice against those guys every week.
Sure.
And so, obviously there was some equal or better talent on our schedule for sure, but there were a lot of teams that just didn't quite, have the talent level. And it was a great advantage for us to be, practicing against our teammates all week for sure.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. You think of guys from your era. I mean, you talk about Griffin, you talk about who was the linebacker? Goddamn. Shit, I forgot.
Who? Perjanic?
Anyway, yeah. I mean, you had a chance. You're going up against you're practicing against great players. And then all of a sudden now, when you get into a game, it's like, well, shit. I mean, these guys, this is nothing. I mean, practice is harder than this.
Right. Yeah, no question about it. I mean, that's definitely an advantage when you're, teammates are, among the most talented players around. That definitely makes Saturday at times, depending on who you're playing, right?
Sure, exactly.
There's going to be some great players there, and there certainly was, but there were also some players who weren't quite as talented, and we had a clear advantage for sure.
So one of the things I also want to talk about, do you have kind of a memorable moment, maybe a non-football moment that you had kind of at school? You mentioned kind of a dorm year, maybe it's a dorm thing, but I mean, do you recall kind of some of the great times you had, kind of non-athletic experiences?
Yeah, for me, I think it was just the time that I had off the field with teammates primarily. The time we got to spend together, we made some relationships with a couple of the local police officers in South Bend and Mishawaka, and used to do some things with those guys. There were quite a few off the field experiences that that really made great memories for me. One in particular was you might remember Brother Tom Rock over at Holy
Absolutely.
Cross.
Absolutely.
I got introduced to him at an early age from some of the senior classmen, and we used to go over there and spend time with him. And what a great guy he was, and he just really took care of us. And we had the experience of eating some great food that we didn't have on our training table, the non-training table that didn't exist.
Yeah, no shit.
So yeah, there were most of the things like that. I mean, for me, almost all of it sort of surrounded my teammates, Chris, and that these are guys that I'm still staying in touch with today, and I would call among my best friends on the planet.
Well, and that's what I think, and it's really controversial. Should our players live with in the dorm with other students, stuff like that? I mean, you can argue it both sides, but I do believe one of my great experiences was during summer school, because you had a chance to literally be next door, being on the hall from your teammates. And although it only lasted a couple months, I by far kind of like what you're talking about. It's not so much kind of an experience, maybe a non-athletic experience. It's the fact that during that time, there wasn't a lot of pressure. We weren't trying to get ready for games. We were kind of just hanging out. And then you had basketball players were there too. Some baseball players were there. So it was almost like during the summertime, you had all these jocks living in one place. I thought it was great.
Yeah, it was great. I did a couple summers in South Bend. It was a great time, great bonding, good times. Like you said, especially there was some of the other sports team players, right? So, and I think that was another thing that sort of made our program a little bit unique. I don't know how unique, but we had a good relationship with hockey players and basketball players and baseball players. We would see those guys, we would hang out with those guys. We'd go to their houses off campus or whatever. That was fun.
So we talked about some bad experiences of football, some good experiences. I mean, what's a memorable football moment for you that may have been kind of worth kind of everything that you had to go through, or maybe not? So, I mean, do you have a moment like that?
Yeah, I think a lot of guys that are, in my era and that were there for, Coach Holtz's first 2 years, obviously the transformation, I can't say enough about, right? That right there in and of itself, in its entirety, transitioning from, the Faust era to the Holtz era pretty much encompasses it all for me. But if I get down to, some specifics, you'll hear some guys talk about that USC game, in '86, which was the last game for, a lot of guys like Steve Berline, for example, that, really sort of, that comeback in the second half, significant comeback from us, and sort of, laid the groundwork that year. We lost so many games by such few points, but you could just see that that the model was working, the program was working, right? Guys were buying in, and they saw the potential. And then, of course, then we transition and go into 87, my senior year. We have a great run. We win a lot of games. Unfortunately, Terry Andrzak got hurt. Tony Rice stepped in. We won a lot of games, but then we lost some close ones. And then, unfortunately, we ended up losing to A&M in the Cotton Bowl. But that USC game in 86, a lot of guys point to that were, playing in those years, that really was the game that was pivotal, to see that, hey, maybe this guy knows what he's talking about, right? To have the wherewithal and in the determination and the stamina, and the buy-in to come back after being down, so many points in the first half, and then to turn around and actually come back and win. And that was the first year that I think, and this went through your entire time at Notre Dame too, Chris, I think we won on, that was the first year of about a 10, 11 year stretch where we beat USC consecutively.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Right.
Wow. Yeah.
Which, was unbelievable. Right. I mean, that had never happened before. One of the great rivalries for ND. But that was a special time.
So what was it like when you were obviously granted the 5th year, when you're kind of making that transition to kind of leave? I mean, was it kind of bittersweet, or, hey, you had an opportunity to be drafted? I mean, obviously want to talk about that, but when you were leaving the university, you just spent 5 years, kind of some rough times, mom passed away, pops has been up hanging out. What was it like kind of leaving for you?
Yeah, it was a little bittersweet because, we had accomplished so much in 87, and it was right there, and you could tell, boy, this is close, right? This is close. There's a lot of great, young underclassmen coming up, and coming in like you, but, guys that were younger that were just starting to, hit their stride and get to their potential. So it was a little bit bittersweet for me. It would have been great, to at least have another year. And of course, missing the national championship the following season, that definitely stung. But, my consolation was, getting drafted, that year. So that took a little bit of the sting out of the whole thing for me.
Well, let's kind of talk about that. I mean, having a chance to be drafted is very rare. It's even rarer having a chance to be drafted by your hometown team, basically, right? I mean, you grew up in the area, you're a huge fan. I mean, kind of walk us through the game in draft days, totally different now than it was way back when, right? So kind of walk us through kind of what was going on. And I mean, were you nervous? Were you excited? Like, what was it like?
Well, again, that and this is full transparency. Okay. I mean, that was a bittersweet situation too, because on the one hand, like you said, grew up huge Steeler fan, huge Mike Webster fan, right? The All Pro center there, who, I backed up, my first couple of years there, chance to go back, had family in the area, that kind of thing. So all that sentimental component was there. But then conversely, the Steelers were also known as one of the cheapest teams in the league, right? So you're sitting there, right? And you've been through this yourself. You're hearing rumors about who's interested and, who you've talked to. And of course, I didn't talk to anybody from Pittsburgh leading up to the draft at all. There were other teams that I had conversations with. Had no idea, but that's the way the draft goes, right? You have no idea. There's a lot of pieces of the puzzle, and things happen, and you end up going back to your hometown. I mean, who would have ever thought that would happen? But yeah, I mean, it's a great organization. Obviously, they've been a powerhouse in the league for a long time, and there was a lot of joy for me, just getting drafted, period. Doesn't matter who the team is. I mean, it was a blessing for me. It was a true blessing for me. And what a great experience. Of course, it's nothing like, all the hoopla and all the festivities and everything that goes on now that we see that's just way over the top. I mean, I think, ironically, back then they were televising, I think maybe midway through the first 3 rounds of the draft at that point.
Okay.
Tom Rader and I were consecutive picks in the third round.
Oh my God.
And I think right when they picked him, and I can't remember who went first, him or me. I can't even remember so long. But that was right when they cut the TV coverage.
Oh my God. Are you serious?
He and I got picked. So
wow.
didn't even get a chance to see it on TV, but I was in home in Memphis with my father, and actually had just left South Bend the day before, and drove back to Memphis to be there for the draft. And it was very quiet, it was very subdued. I mean, it's not like you see today, right? With all these parties.
Like a party, right, exactly. Well, your dad had to feel like, your dad had to feel amazing.
And you had to be home because, you're waiting for there's no cell phone. So you had to be home waiting for the landline, to ring. You had to be somewhere.
You had to make sure no one's on the phone because call waiting wasn't involved, wasn't invented then. So get off the phone, get off the phone.
That's right.
Is the phone still working? Okay, all right.
So yeah, it was special.
How about your pops? Was it a great experience for him as well, or your dad?
Oh yeah, he was about as proud as a father can get, right? So talking to all his buddies, a few other phone calls came in after the team had called and told me that they were gonna draft me, and then of course he has all his family up in the Pittsburgh area, so he really had a lot of fun with it. He was very, very proud.
So what was the experience on kind of putting the first time you put the uniform on, or did you get the chills? Would you just walk out there and practice like, hey, this is really happening? What was that experience like?
Well, quick funny story. So I ended up holding out because earlier I mentioned that Pittsburgh wasn't
right,
most generous in terms of contract.
Great organization, but cheap as hell, right?
So under the advice of my agent at the time, we decided to hold out for a little while and get as much money as we could on the contract. So I think I missed maybe the first week of camp.
Okay.
So I end up showing up, and quick funny story. I fly back. I think I went back to South Bend when it looked like we weren't going to sign.
Okay.
Actually went back to South Bend. Was doing some training there, and then when we finally ended up signing. Showed back up in Pittsburgh, flew into Pittsburgh, didn't have a car, right? So I end up calling a family friend, a distant cousin, and said, "Hey, can you drive me up to Latrobe, Pennsylvania to St. Vincent's for training camp?" Right?
Oh my God.
And it's in the evening, okay? So he and his son drive me up there. And I just think, okay, hey, got a couple bags, right? Hey, just drop me off at St. Vincent's, right? We pull into the campus, Chris, and up to the dorm, and there's probably 3 or 4 news channels there. They got the bright lights on. Hey, third round draft picks showing up, right? Rolling. My family member, they're looking at me like, oh my God. They had no clue, right? They're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy, right? So I was kind of hoping to sneak in the dark of the night, but that didn't happen. And then, immediately you just get thrown in with the wolves, right? You get the playbook and you're in the meetings and you're out there jumping into practice. And of course, not everybody's real happy about it, right? Especially the other linemen, because you missed.
They've had to take more reps since you weren't there, so they're pissed.
Exactly, especially the other centers that were there, right? So, but in the back of their minds, they're all going, "Oh yeah, we get it.
Absolutely."
Right? Because they've all been there too. So
that's awesome. So, do you have a moment that you were like, "Hey, this is awesome"? Did you have a memorable moment when you were with the Steelers?
Well, just getting drafted, and I grew up idolizing Mike Webster as a kid, and then to be on the same team with this guy. And
showering with him in the same meetings. Hey,
to sit there and talk to him, and he couldn't have been a greater guy. He was super humble, helpful, just a class guy. So to be around somebody like that, and to be associated with, an organization like that, it was just really special. And I was really blessed.
Well, we were able to reconnect recently, and a bunch of us had a chance to kind of get together with Coach Holtz for kind of a weekend of fun festivities. But I think one of the cool things was that, we had a chance to reconnect. I say all of us, all that were there, to like folks from different eras,
Right.
right? And so it was cool because I was there with Tony Rice, Todd Light, Mike Stonebreaker, but there were guys that I never played with, like, well, they were on the team, but you had Robert Banks, Joel Williams, um, Frank. I mean, so it was kind of interesting because you had a couple generations
Sure.
kind of hanging out. And I sat back listening to the stories that you guys are talking about. It was great because I was like, wow, even though I wasn't there, it's so great kind of listening and hearing that. And this, I mean, I changed over the years, but I really thought that, hey, the reason why we were so successful is because we had a bunch of young guys who were talented. Hey, we can do this on our own. And that's not the case. I mean, literally, it was built on the backs of you guys. I mean, when I say 58-7, I mean, that was a tough game. And what you're able to kind of learn from that, right? And we talk about USC, and there was a process. And I had never kind of seen that process up close. And so kind of listening to you guys and talking to you guys and really kind of getting a better understanding of kind of what the tradition meant, right? Because we didn't have to go through the challenges that you guys had to go through, right? I mean, we were fortunate enough, as you said, kind of the success we had when Holtz was there. I was fortunate. I only lost a handful of games, but kind of hearing the stories that you guys had to go through, I thought it was great. And so having a chance to kind of be a fly on the wall and kind of listening to those stories, I thought was a great experience.
It was. It's always great to get together with old teammates and me too, just like you. There were some guys that I didn't get a chance to play with, like Oscar McBride, for example. And just to hear how much better all you guys had it than we had it was interesting to listen to. But you're right. Yeah, it was. As you get further and further into the process of, Coach Holtz's 10 years, right? It just got better and better. And, it was fun to hear from you guys how you just, obviously just 1 year removed from when I graduated, all the stars aligned and boom, you got the national championship, right? So, yeah, what an experience, and it was great fun listening to a lot of those stories too.
Well, and I think it's great because oftentimes, I mean, certain positions hang out with certain positions, and so it was great kind of hearing kind of what you guys did or hear about what Joel did, or because you're always not around, right? Regardless of even if they're in your class, like half the shit that Todd and Stoney were talking about, I didn't know about. So it was kind of great hearing kind of those stories, but more importantly, kind of getting that kind of theme of that, like, we didn't just do it because we were young kids with talent. Like, there was a foundation that was built by the former players. And I think that's so important. And I hope that the guys there had a chance to kind of understand that because, it's kind of, when you talk about team, leadership and being on a team, it's so important to kind of have that, but more importantly, kind of understanding and acknowledge that as well.
Absolutely. I agree with that. You got to have the strategy, right? And we all know what Coach Holtz brought to the table, and the staff that he put together was a great staff as well. But you also have to have players, right? So, early on in that process, guys, like I said a while ago, some are not going to get on board, right? Hopefully you get more on board than you don't, but you got to see the results on the field. And I think that took, the program so far down the road and allowed it to make huge strides very early in his first 2 seasons, right? Because you see the results, you see the wins, you see the close games, there weren't any 58-7 games when Lou showed up.
Right.
Right. I mean, it just didn't happen. I mean, we were competitive. We thought every time we walked out on the field that we could win that game.
Mm-hmm.
And we felt like we were going to win the game. Right.
Right.
I mean, that was the mentality.
Well, and it kind of leads to we're going to start wrapping up a little bit here, but kind of going on those lines, Chuck. I mean, talk to us about kind of the culture shift you're able to witness, kind of being involved in the locker room where there were some issues. Now, like, the games are not 58-7. You guys lose them by like a field goal or 1 point now. I mean, talk to us a little bit about kind of what you saw, kind of that in the locker room during that culture, because it's not necessarily just that locker room. It's the years after that as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, I think it goes back, Chris, to the mentality and the discipline and, the system, the process, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of components that go into, to winning and making any organization great. We had the good fortune of, being under the leadership of a coach, who had that recipe. He knew what it took. He knew how to build a winner because he had done it before. And, we had enough talent there in the first couple of years to really make the transition, because remember, there was a lot of good players on those teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
These weren't slouch players. I mean, we had a lot of talent for sure. The talent just got better and better as the results, in the win column got better and better as years went on. But, the culture you could absolutely see. I mean, it was, you could kind of, point your finger to different things, whether it was, how we train differently, how the staff talks to us, how we talk to staff, little things. I mean, you have the strategy, but then you have the tactics, right?
Sure. Right.
And
right.
we knew that Coach Holtz, knew what to do when he got there. And it was just us basically just up to us to listen. But then there's that huge motivational factor with him, right? I mean, I think we were all blown away by the motivational factor with Coach Holtz. Nothing that I had ever heard before, probably no one else on the team, especially the nights before the games, but he would have us so prepared. We were ready to run through a wall for the guy. So, that to me was, and then of course, we all saw this subsequently with, all his motivational speeches that he would make, both not only for athletics, but, in the corporate world.
Sure.
I mean, he's famous for that, right? He was an excellent motivational speaker, still is to this day. So, that, in the minds of 18, 20-year-old, guys is huge. It's huge.
Chuck, this has been awesome, man. We actually went over a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about cigars, but what are you smoking now? What are you smoking now?
What am I smoking now?
Yeah.
There's a brand I like out there called Tabernacle, which is a little bit obscure, but it's a good one. I like Oliva as well. There's just, a lot of things. Arturo Fuente, I like a lot of the stuff that they do. I mean, it's been so, I've been smoking cigars for much longer than I care to admit. It's a great pastime. It's a great, it's a great experience for me to unwind and relax and kind of unplug. But again, I mean, very similar in a parallel to what we went through with athletics and teammates, right? There's kind of that, group of guys in the cigar world, and it doesn't matter if you're, a baggage guy at American Airlines or a CEO, when you're all in the same, room and you're all smoking cigars and talking cigars, and it's you just have that commonality, and it's great, and I really enjoy that time.
And it's funny because you mentioned that haven't had a chance in the last year because of COVID to kind of go to a couple of spots around my house, but that's the camaraderie that I enjoyed, right? It wasn't so much, I could smoke in my basement by myself, but how much fun is that, right? I mean, having a chance to kind of go out there, get the camaraderie. And like you said, you could be a baggage handler at the airport, or you can be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And when you're sitting there smoking a cigar, it's an enjoyable time. And no one smokes a cigar quick. So it's a chance to sit there, relax, and enjoy for like even in an hour plus.
That's right. Yeah, it's truly a great opportunity to unwind and relax, and good conversation. Whether oftentimes there's a game on, right? There's some kind of sporting event on at these places, and I got my couple of favorite spots that I like to go to, and it's something that I really get a lot of enjoyment out, as I know you do too.
Chuck, this has been great, man. I'm sorry. Again, I apologize. We kind of went over a little bit, but
no, it's okay.
I had a chance to learn a lot about you, some new stuff, but also I'm glad we had a chance to kind of let you know that it was never about, hey, I'm trying to be an ass on Wednesday. I was just trying to make you guys better. And
hey,
folks, this is like 30 years later. Like, I've never told you this. I've never told Chuck this before. And we had some battles, but it was never about that.
No, I never thought it was. And I don't think any less of you either way, Chris. And I really appreciate you reaching out and having me on today too, because it's been great fun. I always love talking Notre Dame football, talking about my teammates. Catching up with an all-time great like you too was just a heck of a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm excited because when I had a chance to kind of go to this event that we had, and we kind of hung out and stuff like that, we had a chance to talk. But for me, I don't think I was ready to kind of explain that, and I honestly didn't think I was going to talk about it here on the show. But when I got back, I started to think more about it, and I was like, man, I wonder if Chuck thinks I was like this asshole, like just trying to make a name for myself, trying to do something. And I was like, man, I hope we actually had a chance to cover that on the show, because I'd love to explain to him that hey, man, honestly, I was not trying to be a jerk. I mean, it was just something that I wanted to make you guys better. That's all.
I'm glad this was a good therapy session.
Chuck, this has been awesome. I'd like to thank everyone watching and listening to this episode of the Zorich podcast, Conversations with Leaders and Legends. This podcast, along with our others, are on my YouTube page at youtube.com/ChrisZorich50, as well as on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. If you haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel, hit the bell to be notified as we bring you more content. Also, check out the description below, as we have books from Amazon from folks who have been on the show, like Joe Montana, Jerome Bettis, and Coach Holtz. Chuck, this has been awesome, man. I really appreciate kind of taking this trip down memory lane. Also, my little therapy session, selfishly, for me. So it was good, man. I really appreciate it.
Great to see you.
You got it. Go Irish.
Yeah, go Irish.